Well, good afternoon. It is the 11th of April, 2021. Today is a special day for anyone in federal law enforcement. And really, it's an event, an anniversary of an event that's pivotal in the history of American law enforcement, not just federal law enforcement, but all law enforcement. And I think it's very rare that a single enforcement action has as much impact as this one did. What I'm referring to, of course, is the April 11th, 1986 FBI shootout in Miami. And at the time, uh, this was the bloodiest day in the history of the FBI. Two agents were killed, five were critically injured, and two violators were killed in the space of about 3 to 4 minutes of shooting in an area of Miami it's in Metro-Dade outside the city of Miami, called Kendall. In a town that's I'll show you the monument that's been erected to the agents who were killed on that day. But the impact of this shootout was great in terms of the training offered to law enforcement officers, the body armor offered to law enforcement officers, the firearms offered to law enforcement officers. All of these things were impacted based on this one event. Now, a little bit of background, just, again, to my background, which, this is not about me, it's about the agents who were killed that day and everything else that happened. But I had graduated from the FBI Academy on January 31st, 86. So just a few months before. I reported to Miami April 7th, 86, 5 days before this shooting. Okay. And I had state-of-the-art law enforcement equipment at the time, which was a Model 65 Smith & Wesson revolver, which either fired 357 Magnum or 38 Special Plus P. We carried 38 Special Plus P plus. A lot of us carried a 38, including myself, a 38 Special revolver, stainless steel, as a backup, personally owned weapon, usually on our leg. And the revolver would be carried, obviously, on the side. We were also trained extensively at the FBI Academy on the 12-gauge shotgun. And those of us had been in the military, such as myself, but we also fired the M16 in training. And on my first day, we had an enforcement action that carried an M16. So, of course, this shootout had nothing to do with me or anything to do with DEA. It had to do with some bank robbers. And the background of these robbers is fairly interesting because neither one had a criminal record. Very unusual. Both men were born in the 1950s, early 1950s. William Maddox, the first one, born 1951. He graduated high school in Ohio, enlisted in the Marine Corps. He served several years as a cook and was honorably discharged. It says that he served part of his time in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, and part of his time in Hawaii. He worked in the officers' mess. 1 year after his separation in 1972, August 1973, he enlisted in the Army. So he had a favorable RE code. He enlisted as a military policeman to serve with the 101st Airborne at Fort Campbell. At the time, you could sign up for both a job and a unit, which is what he did. He was trained as an MP and went through the Air Assault School. And it was at Fort Campbell that he met another soldier, Michael Lee Platt, who had also enlisted right after graduating high school in 1972. Platt was also from Ohio. Platt went through Army Ranger School and was ultimately assigned to the 101st Airborne, also at Fort Campbell. And it's there that he met William Maddox, and the two became friends. After Maddox's separation from the Army, Maddox returned to Ohio and began to go to culinary schools. And Platt was separated from the Army in 1979 as a staff sergeant. He also returned to Ohio. Both of them struggled a little bit trying to find good employment when they were out. Both men married. Now, this is something that is very odd. It only came to the attention of the police investigators after these men were dead. Both of their wives, had died under suspicious circumstances. William Maddox's wife, had been strangled by a apparent break-in person at the hospital where she worked. And Platt's wife, apparent suicide, shotgun to the mouth. Now, after these men were dead, they had killed the FBI agents, they were dead, the investigator said, both of these men collected large life insurance policies on their wives. I wonder if these son of a buckets didn't have their wives killed and have the other one do it. which makes a lot of sense, actually. Well, we'll never really know that. But what we do know is that in 1983, Platt moves from Ohio to Miami and sets up a business, the Yankee Clipper, which is a tree trimming business. Now, for those of you who don't know, in the early 1980s, Miami becomes flooded with cocaine. It's much more violent than the southwest border is right now. The city was very violent. The police were outgunned. We had a Memoriam boat lift, which was a boat lift of refugees from Cuba, who had come in 1980. A lot of them were criminals in Cuba. And a lot of them were well armed. Semi-automatic, automatic weapons came into Miami. The police were outgunned. So when I reported to Miami on April 7th, 1986, we were really armed, the best armed agents for the 1930s, because the law enforcement technology really, in terms of armament and training, had not moved forward. We were trained exceptionally well with a 6-shot revolver. And this was pretty much standard with all police departments. And really the only agents and officers who could carry semi-automatics were SWAT-trained officers. But that mentality had not filtered through to anyone else besides those people who were specially trained. Now, on the day of the robbery, the reason the agents set up is that these two men, Maddox and Platt, had committed a series of robberies. About 5, starting in October of 1985, and continuing up just to a few weeks before. They would hit banks on Fridays or armored car vehicles. And they had made about $100,000 in their robberies. They had killed 2 people in their robberies, one a bank guard, and one just a young man who was out shooting in a pit in the middle of the Everglades. And these men would go every week. They fired about 1,000 rounds a week with the weapons that they had. And Platt had a Ruger Mini 14, which, if you don't know, it's a semi-automatic. It's like an M1 rifle. Okay, fires semi-automatic. And Maddox had a 12-gauge shotgun. Both men had .357 revolvers and lots of ammunition. Okay, so these men had a demonstrated propensity to take life, number one. Number two, they were well trained, particularly Michael Platt as an Army Ranger. And number three, they hit banks on Friday afternoons, and the group supervisor of the FBI group, because the FBI investigates armed bank robberies. Banks are federally insured, so they had a bank robbery squad. There's a man named Gordon McNeil, and he took what I call a swag, a swinging wild ass guess, and he said, let's set up on US 1, which is a big road it runs down the coast, really from Maine down to Key West. It was in this area of Miami called Kendall. We'll set up with 2 groups of FBI agents on Friday morning, and if they hit, we'll be right near one of these banks. They're probably going to hit one of these banks, but we don't know which one. But it beats sitting in the office, because we don't know. We do have a suspect vehicle and a plate that was taken from a victim. So this is what they set up on. And they were spread out, the agents, there were about 15 agents, 2 groups, but they were spread out over an area of about 8 to 9 miles. Some were much further south than others, because you had no idea what bank they were going to set up on. And they met up in the parking lot of a Home Depot. This has happened to me so many times, And then agents just started driving up and down US 1 trying to spot this suspect vehicle. Well, lo and behold, about 9:30 a.m., agents Grogan and Dove spot the suspect vehicle. And it's headed northbound on US 1, and he immediately puts it out on the radio. And the supervisor says, stay with it. And the other agents come out, and they're trying to maneuver in and out of traffic to reach the rolling surveillance. And the vehicle is now going north on US 1. The vehicle is proceeding very slowly. And pretty soon, agents Grogan and Dove were right on the bumper. And of course, they were instructed, you do not let this vehicle go no matter what. This is not a typical surveillance. Stay on that vehicle, okay? Because we're going to arrest these people. They're no good. We think they're the bank robbers. And they're looking in the rearview mirror, Maddox is, and he begins to make right turns. And this is what a person does when you're under surveillance. When you think you're being followed, you start making right turns. Of course, the FBI agent vehicle made right turns with him. And they end up in a subdivision off of US 1. And he makes a fake right turn, then he turns the directional off, makes another right turn. and there's a number of vehicles just following him very slowly. And at this point, these crooks know that the jig is up. Agent McNeil, the supervisor, is paralleling, which for those of you who don't know, he's on another street, headed in the same direction. Well, the crooks make another right, and Agent McNeil makes a left, and he goes by. And as he does so, he sees Platt loading a Mini 14 and looks right at him. And Platt looks at him like the cold death stare, basically, like, this is it. I'm not giving up. And he puts it out. He's loading up a weapon. Don't let him back out onto US 1, no matter what. Keep him away from US 1. We don't want the shootout to break out in a public area where there's going to be a lot of people getting hit. The suspect vehicle goes north, makes another right. Group Supervisor McNeil orders a vehicle stop to be made. At this point, a number of FBI agent vehicles have arrived at the scene, and they begin to force the vehicle, and they force it into a cul-de-sac on a one-way dead-end street. The vehicle is positioned very well. The suspect vehicle stopped very well. It's next to a parked vehicle, a clump of trees in the front, and another parked vehicle, an agent's vehicle, came up and sideswiped it to hold it in. So the vehicle is pretty well pinned. And this is where the shootout starts, and I'm going to show a graphic at this point. This is a diagram of how the vehicles ended up after the vehicle had been forcibly stopped. And as you can see, this is the target vehicle, which contained Maddox and Platt, the two bank robbers. This is Agent Manozzi's vehicle, Supervisor McNeil's vehicle, and Agent Grogan and Dove, and then Hanlon and Morales were in this vehicle. This was just a parked vehicle. So there was nowhere they could go. They were contained well. The only thing I would have done differently, obviously, is this vehicle nowadays would come to the bumper so that they could not back out. But they didn't attempt to escape, so that's irrelevant for the purposes of this. But what happened immediately is that Mr. Platt, Michael Platt, who was in the passenger side of this vehicle, began opening fire on Agent Manozzi, who was here. He had lost his weapon. Manozzi had lost his weapon. He was injured, crawled out of the car, was out of the gunfight, was unable to participate. He had no backup weapon. Special Agent McNeil came around to the hood of Manozzi's vehicle and opened fire, and gunfire was exchanged between the two. At the same time, Special Agents Grogan and Dove also opened fire on this vehicle, and Special Agent Morales began to run across towards where Grogan and Dove's vehicle was to participate in the gunfight. Morales was carrying a 12-gauge shotgun at port arms, and as he came near the vehicle, Platt began firing through the rear window and struck Agent Morales in the arm, knocking him down, first severe wound of the gunfight. The gunfight continued. Platt popped down with the seat to reload. Maddox then opened up with the 12-gauge, got out of the vehicle with the 12-gauge, fired at Grogan and Dove. They returned fire, striking Maddox, who returned to his vehicle. Agent McNeil then fired rounds at Maddox, striking him in the head, causing a bruising of the brain and knocking him unconscious. Michael Platt then returned fire toward Group Supervisor McNeil, striking him in the hand, shattering his hand, which showered his pistol with bone and blood fragments and rendered his weapon inoperative, and also striking him in the spinal column, knocking him down and temporarily paralyzing him. Platt then exited this vehicle and began to shimmy across the hood of the Cutlass, which is parked next to him. Agents Grogan and Dove continued to fire. At this point, Agent Dove one of his rounds struck Platt through the right arm. It severed the brachial artery, collapsed his right lung, and lodged next to his heart. And this was a fatal wound. If Platt had received it on the operating room of a hospital operating table, he would have died. So by all accounts, he should have stopped and laid down and said his act of contrition and died, but he didn't, okay? He didn't get that memo. He kept going. He was hit several more times. He was now unable to use his right arm. He drew his revolver, fired several rounds, and then went to the left arm with the Mini 14 and continued firing. It was during this time that Hanlon, who had come forward, was shot in the hand and knocked down, and Agent Dove's weapon was rendered inoperable. It was struck by one of the rounds fired by Platt and rendered inoperable. Agent Grogan ran out of ammunition. At this point, Platt reloaded, came around a clump of trees, and came up behind the parked FBI vehicle. He shot Agent Grogan in the chest, immediately killing him. He shot Agent Dove twice in the head, immediately killing him. He first went to the chest of Agent Hanlon, who was on the ground, then smiled, lowered the weapon to his groin, and fired. Now, at this point, Platt has lost about 1.5 liters of blood, and during the autopsy, they found that he had that much blood in his thoracic cavity. He then gets into the driver's seat of the FBI vehicle in an attempt to escape. Somehow, during this whole thing, the driver of this car, Maddox, gets out and got to the passenger side. We don't know how that happens. Nobody saw it happen because of tunnel vision, but he was there. Morales came forward and began to fire the 12 gauge with his left arm only, into this vehicle. At this point, one of the witnesses says that Platt came out and fired a .357 Magnum that he had taken from Maddox in the general direction of the agents, but he had lost so much blood at this point, the rounds were not accurate. He then got back into the car. Agent Morales then advanced and fired 6 rounds into the passenger compartment of the vehicle, inflicting fatal wounds on Maddox and finishing off Platt. And that was the end of the gunfight. In all, there had been about close to 200 rounds exchanged. 5 agents were critically wounded, 2 were killed, and the 2 violators were killed. And this all in this space of about 3 to 4 minutes. The result of this shooting was it became the most studied law enforcement enforcement action in history, and several deficiencies were noted. Number one, the revolver, the 6-shot revolver, was considered to be obsolete. The agents who had 6-shot revolvers, now ironically, the 2 agents who were killed have both had semi-automatics, but the 2 agents, the agents who had revolvers said they felt most vulnerable when they had to dump and reload, and some of them ran out of ammunition. Some did not have a backup weapon, and having to stop after you fire 6 rounds and dump and reload, it's while you're being fired at, it's probably very, very tough. So that was the first thing that went. The second thing was a failure of the round. Michael Platt had been hit numerous times and been hit fatally by a 9mm round fired by Agent Dove, but even though he had been hit fatally, he didn't die immediately. He kept fighting, and this was considered to be a failure of the round. The round simply was not powerful enough. The handgun round was considered to be, as they existed, insufficiently powerful to end a gunfight. Now, what happened as a result of this, these are the weapons that were seized as a result of the shootout. You can look at some of the vehicles here and see the damage that was done. But the result was that the FBI, first of all, with regards to their defensive weapons, because you have defensive and offensive weapons, your defensive weapon is a handgun. And what they did as a result of that was come up with a new caliber. And the first one that they tested was the 10mm, which proved to be too powerful, so they compromised and came up with what is now known as the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson, fired out of a semi-automatic pistol. And this round was considered to be sufficiently lethal to not just fatally wound somebody, but to knock them down and keep them out of the gunfight. It was considered that a .38 special or 9mm, as they existed at the time, were not sufficient. Also, all agents, including me, were issued 9mm submachine guns, both semi-automatic and fully automatic, and agents were also encouraged and allowed to purchase their own semi-automatic M4 and AR-15 rifles, of which I still have mine. It hasn't fallen out of the canoe yet. I still have it, and these were very important. because it gave us at least an equal footing with those of the criminals, with the weapons carried by the criminals. We also got better body armor and better instruction on how to wear it. But, one thing that is undeniable is that law enforcement technology changed greatly as a result of this shootout. And this video is in the memory of Agent Ben Grogan and Agent Jerry Dove. I attended Ben Grogan's funeral. A really dark day in the history of law enforcement, but it's also, we learned from our mistakes. So today's a day to remember the heroism of Special Agent Ben Grogan, who was 52 when he died. Special Agent Jerry Dove, who only had a few years on the job, and he also died in the encounter. Special Agent Edmundo Morales, still alive today, was grievously wounded but took out the two suspects. Special Agent John Hanlon, still alive today, grievously wounded but held his ground and fired. Special Agent Group Supervisor Gordon McNeil, who has since passed away from cancer, but was wounded grievously during the fight. Special Agent Ron Reisner, who has since passed away and escaped the fight without an injury, but was able to hit Mr. Platt, Michael Platt, from a distance of over 25 yards with his handgun. And Special Agent Richard Manozzi, who also survived the gunfight. So God bless them. May the souls of Ben Grogan, Jerry Dove, and others who have passed on rest in peace. May we always remember their sacrifice and imitate their bravery, because even if they have bad equipment, we've learned from our mistakes. But one thing we can't replace, bravery. You either have that or you don't have it, and these men had it. They did what they were trained to do. So God bless them, and God bless all the men and women of law enforcement. Okay, thank you.